All right, I'm here with Caitlin, and we're going to talk about BlueWalker, among other things. But first, Caitlin's got misinformation.
I do. Well, I'm always happy to share misinformation with our lovely audience. However, this time I'm not the one sharing misinformation. grist.org, Climate Justice Solutions. So keep in mind, this is a bit of a biased publication. They have a report showing that, or they're reporting on a report, I should say, that the electric utilities in America were part of the growing list of people that spread climate misinformation starting in the 1960s all the way to the early 2000s. So people probably know, this is general common knowledge nowadays, that the big oil companies spread climate misinformation, knowing that climate change would be very deleterious to their business model. And this is very similar to the cigarette companies that spread misinformation about cigarettes when it turned out that cigarettes were bad. And they would have doctors do commercials saying, I'm a doctor and I smoke cigarettes. These things are great for you. And well, it turns out, like I said, these researchers looked at statements released by American electric utilities. And a new study published in the Journal of Environmental Research Letters shows that yes, the American electric utilities were just as culpable in spreading climate misinformation as the rest of the large industries, which really goes to show the importance of having, or I should say, separating the profit motive from a lot of these public infrastructure or these large public infrastructure monopolies, essentially, where they have a huge profit motive, to keep their business, as profitable as possible. And unfortunately, sometimes that does mean misleading the public. It does mean spreading misinformation. And it does mean the fact that we are now dealing with a climate crisis, which arguably could have been somewhat avoided if a lot of these powerful players were more honest in the past.
Yeah, well, I think it's true of a lot of things. It's true of the fentanyl crisis, and this is many, many things go this way.
Well, yeah, like I was saying, this is really an issue when you have companies, private companies, creating public infrastructure with a private, monetary motive.
Yeah.
This is sort of what happens, and this is a side effect. I'm not saying there aren't side effects when we publicize, or essentially socialize all of these services. Um, but in general, if these large companies were not motivated by profit, it's very unlikely we would have seen the level of misinformation spread in the late 20th century.
Yeah, and I've heard this described as a philosophical problem of the one and the many. There's
Right,
many cases where you can personally gain by hurting the people at large.
right.
And it's one of the arguments against capitalism, where you say if corporations just make the maximum amount of money, that'll be great. And well, sometimes it's not so great.
Right. Well, I don't know what to do other than other than advocate for socialism in this kind of case because you can't say, "Hey, companies don't lie anymore" because it's bad. I mean, if lying will make them richer and there's no real negative consequences for the next 40 years, why wouldn't they lie?
Well, this is why we don't have pure capitalism anymore, because we got tired of the abuses of rampant capitalism. And so we have some regulations.
We do.
Yeah. All right. Well, I got a bunch of cryptocurrency articles. There's just endless chaos in the cryptocurrency space. Um, the U.S. Treasury is blacklisting Tornado Cash, which is a mixer to anonymize transactions, and Coinbase is funding a lawsuit against it on the grounds that, look, what you don't want is you don't want illegal money being laundered, but here you are trying to ban a whole technology which has good and bad purposes. It's very much like the privacy wars, where the government might well want to ban things like Tor and ban strong encryption because criminals can use it to hide. But of course, there may be other people that just wish to have privacy. And so it's another one of those battles that will never end, like the one we were just discussing. And the White House is jumping in with there was a statement that came out a few months ago from the White House, which they're now interpreting to say, in order to further the United States climate agenda, they should force Bitcoin to stop using proof of work mining and or ban Bitcoin. And this has not happened yet, but they're talking about it. And this may well affect the price of cryptocurrencies. As usual, I take sort of the right-wing position on this. Seems to me like they're too late, too stupid. It's already happening anyway. Ethereum is moving from proof of work to proof of stake next week. The market forces are already making it move. And Bitcoin has no intention of doing it, but I would assume any possibility of Bitcoin doing it will depend on watching to see what happens to Ethereum. But anyway, Ethereum is betting that by becoming greener, in addition to having extra functionality, they will have the flippity. They'll become more prominent than Bitcoin, and they will replace Bitcoin in the market. That's what a lot of people expect to happen, and that would address this issue without the government having to wander in with regulation. Anyway, they are talking about it. I doubt they're going to reach a consensus and actually do it. Now, in the world of Ethereum, there are these .eth domain names that people get. So you don't have to type in an Ethereum address. And I don't quite understand exactly how they work. They aren't free, so I haven't got one yet, although I see people with them and think maybe I should get one. But if you do get an .eth address, apparently this is not a normal domain name that you can resolve and go to a website on. It's just a Web3 address that points to your wallet. So in order to connect it to a Web2 address, the proponent of this bought eth.link. And then he said you could be somebody.eth, and then you'd have someone.eth.link to go to your website. But the problem is the man that bought that domain is the guy that went to North Korea and illegally helped them launder cash and is now in prison. And because he's in prison, he cannot renew his domain name that he registered at GoDaddy, and GoDaddy sold it to someone else. So they're now freaking out and saying, you've ruined the whole plan here for the .eth namespace, and you promised you wouldn't do that. And, they'll already let him renew his domain name once while in prison, and then they refused to let him renew it just because he was in prison. So there's a storm going on about that. And the last one I actually did do is there's a team behind blockchain DNS, which I thought is one of the smarter applications of blockchain. DNS is supposed to be a database with independence of sources. And so putting it on the blockchain would seem like a good idea. They call it Unstoppable Web, and they will give you a free NFT domain name. So now I own sambound.nft. So I'm not exactly sure what I could do with it, but you can get it for free.
Make your own NFT collection.
Well, yes, that's what somebody has already told me I should do. Recently, they said I should just be handing out NFTs. That was what I think Kaz said. I should just be handing out NFTs as prizes to my students, and I'm looking into that. I should probably do that. I'm finding it more annoying than I thought to put up NFTs, but I got about halfway through it. Yes, and then
what? Oh, go on.
No, that's right. Then I can use my glorious NFT domain name as the address for it all.
So what was the process to get the NFT domain name exactly? What did you have to do?
Well, you have to create a second wallet, and you have to load like 4 different packages of software that I don't really understand very well. And then they want me to make some kind of machine that will pump them out. I think what I'm getting is this, what they do, where they have a template and they make like 10,000 variations. And I'm not sure I want to do that. Anyway, I'm going through a tutorial to do the current process to put up NFTs and trying to decide how much of it makes any sense to me.
Okay.
I don't really want to make 10,000 computer generated. I don't think, but that is the standard. Yeah. Anyway, that's the madness of NFTs. I'm going to make some NFTs of some kind, but I haven't quite figured out how to do it yet. And let's go back. You've got carbon dioxide.
Yeah, so this is interesting, to say the least. NASA on nasa.gov has an article talking about the James Webb Space Telescope and its finding of carbon dioxide in an exoplanet around 700 light years away. So this exoplanet, which is called WASP-39, is a hot gas giant, meaning it's a gas giant planet that orbits very close to its star. It's about 900 degrees Celsius or 1,600 degrees Fahrenheit on the outside. And when it transits its stars, when it transits its star, it transits its star. I mean, it's a big old thing. So it makes a good candidate for testing a lot of new technologies, like what's in the James Webb Telescope, to see if we can't get more information about this exoplanet. Now, despite the fact that it is large, and despite the fact that it is, orbiting so close and everything, it's still very difficult to actually resolve this planet in any meaningful detail because of the Rayleigh criterion, which basically means it's always going to look like a dot. However, the James Webb Space Telescope can, or recently proved its ability to look at the light coming from its transit, seeing what was blocked and what wasn't, and determining that there was indeed carbon dioxide in the atmosphere of this exoplanet, which is very impressive. Now, this isn't the first time atmospheres have been discovered, or parts of the atmosphere have been discovered in this exoplanet. So previously, other telescopes have discovered things like water vapor, and a few other trace elements, but this is the first time that these researchers were able to detect carbon dioxide, which is a very important gas in a lot of atmospheres.
So is it an unusual amount of carbon dioxide, or the same
No,
amount you might find in like Jupiter or Saturn or something?
I mean, the exact amounts, I don't think anyone really knows at this point. All you can really detect is it's so for people at home that don't do a whole lot of spectroscopy for some reason. I don't know why you wouldn't. But when you're looking at spectroscopy, what you're doing is you are looking at the emission and absorption lines of light, passing through or being emitted by a substance. And that's all they're doing. They're not, taking detailed samples and looking at the atmosphere like, little bit by little bit. They're just basically using James Webb Space Telescope as a form of spectroscopy. And, so there's only so much data, but you can know for sure that there is carbon dioxide in this exoplanet.
Yeah. All right. Well, I've got kiwi farms. It's been all over the rage everywhere. And there's a nice article from Ars Technica summarizing the story, which I thought was helpful because it's been blowing up all over Twitter. So kiwi farms has apparently been around for a couple of years. I never got to see it when it was up, but it sounds like it's pretty much the same thing as 4chan, where a bunch of really angry right-wingers do terrible things. And they started outing trans people, and some of them committed suicide. And so a bunch of people targeted by them with swatting attacks and such started fighting back and saying everybody needs to boycott them and block them. And they attacked primarily Cloudflare, which provided catching and anti-DDoS for them. And so they managed to put a lot of pressure on Cloudflare, and Cloudflare finally took them down. And I was surprised by this because I have the old-fashioned attitude, the same as Matthew Prince. That's why he and I are friends. On similar controversy 10 years ago, I was supporting him when everybody was mad at him, because I think Cloudflare is like AT&T and Comcast. They're just automatic infrastructure delivering the internet, and they have no business censoring the internet. And he explains his position here, how he still holds that position and did not want to censor them, but he decided he wanted to leave it up to law enforcement to take them down, which there's proper due process. The cops come, you have a chance to go to court and defend yourself. But he decided that they were doing dangerous death threats and trying to get people killed right away. And the law enforcement was too slow taking them down, so he took them down, which he has done to about 2 previous sites over the last several years, one of them being the Daily Stormer and another one. So there's been a few times when Cloudflare has stepped in and blocked providing their caching and protection to a site. Now, the surprising thing to me is I did not think that would take kiwi farms down. And indeed, they were back up the next day, but they are so toxic that even the Russian DDoS service kicked them off and said, we're not protecting you. And their host kicked them off, although I see rumors that they found yet another site and they are back up. Apparently, they managed to make such a bad reputation that they're having trouble to find anybody on Earth that will host them. But anyway, I'm glad you're here for this, Caitlin, because when I talked to you about this before, you said there's some new form of morality that I'm not in on that says that this is the right thing to do to take them down at Cloudflare.
Right. So what I was talking to Sam about off our podcast is that there was a very noble sentiment in sort of the mid to late 20th century that would go something like this.
And also the second century under Marcus Aurelius. Anyway, go
Yes,
ahead.
yes, and the second century. I disagree with what you have to say, but I will die for your right to say it, which, sounds great on paper and everything. That has in recent decades started to fall out of favor. And this is mostly due to science. There's been a lot of study done into hate speech, and it turns out that hate speech is not just stuff that's just vile and you disagree with it and just you want to get rid of it. It really is harmful. The same way that if you saw somebody, walk into a business with a gun and it looks very dangerous, you would want to stop that person. Because someone could get hurt. And as you mentioned, Sam, there are instances of, for example, of Kiwi Farm, and targeting people and causing or at least contributing to their suicide. So, excuse me. So it's not a simple matter of I disagree with you anymore. There's this added complexity of self-defense. And the general sort of new politically correct way to think about this sort of thing is to still agree that the government really should not be censoring people, because that is one of those few slippery slopes that never ends up working out very well.
There's also that pesky First Amendment.
Yeah, and that's why we have the First Amendment, because when the government starts censoring private citizens, that's a problem. However, there's nothing stopping private citizens from saying, "Hey, I don't like this. I'm not going to, assist you in saying it," or trying to.
Certainly. I think no one would doubt that Cloudflare has the right to deny service to anybody if they want to.
Right.
But they also have the right not to deny service, and they're standing by an old principle and not doing that.
Right. Exactly. So what Cloudflare is doing is they're sort of going with the old style. I disagree with what you have to say, but I'll die to, defend Nazis to be able to say whatever they want to say. And
to be fair, I don't think Matthew said he's going to die for it. What he says is he does not want the job of being the censor of the internet. He wants instead to pass that on to law enforcement, where there is due process, where they have to accuse you of something, and then you get to go to court and defend yourself, instead of just having, you've offended me, so off with your head.
Right. I mean, and keep in mind, this is a very clear case. I'm not being, I'm not exaggerating here. These are literal Nazis, Cloudflare is protecting. So, this is a very extreme case and a very sort of clear cut, hey, these people are really bad and everything. But the whole logic, and I would actually understand Cloudflare if their position was simply, hey, we don't have the time or money to evaluate every single site. We just put stuff up, we don't worry about the morality of it. I can understand that. That really wasn't their response, though. Their response was much more of, we will not censor the internet, and we're not going to be the ones to do that. And they were fair.
They can't claim they don't have the money and time for it, because it's only been like 3 sites in a few years, and this one was the big one. And usually, when people say we don't have the time to monitor it, they say instead we'll respond to complaints.
Right. Well, but that's why the position is very politically incorrect to say, I'll defend, Nazis' right to say whatever they want, even though I disagree with it. That's because, of course, like I said, there's been a lot of studies showing that kind of speech is extremely harmful. And by not actively trying to take it down, you are essentially passively supporting, this, harmful stuff going on. So,
this is also what blocked the current attempt to regulate tech that just died in the Senate, because the Republicans will come in and say, there you are censoring right-wing speech when you won't let us tell you that the vaccine doesn't work, the last election was stolen, and things like that. And we demand that you give equal credence to our complaint.
Right. And that's why you don't let the government censor things.
But private companies will now receive exactly the same flood of complaints from people on the right claiming that you must stop saying things that are true because they wish to push things that are false.
Right. And to that, I would say, well, there's the private companies have a choice to make. They can either, one, let a flood of misinformation go rampant on their sites, which does not look good for them, I think, and does not serve them well long term. They could decide, or they can decide, they could decide to go with the right wing and then push all the left winging, people off their site, essentially, and start saying we're not going to allow anyone to say anything that like the vaccine is safe and it's been tested. We're strictly conspiracy theory stuff, and there are a few sites like that.
Oh, sure. There's Fox News. There's
Yeah,
big media empires based on that. But
yeah.
I mean, the point, what Cloudflare is trying to do, which is very difficult here, is to avoid taking sides in the culture war and say, we just don't censor anybody. We don't take any side on any argument. If you have an argument, go to court.
Okay, so once again, Sam, that's a very politically incorrect thing to say, because Nazis are not a culture war issue. Culture war issues
I
are
think
things
they are the culture war issue. The right is very openly Nazi now. The whole Trump movement is essentially Nazis. And there is a likelihood that we're going to be ruled by Nazis very soon in 2024. So it is, I don't know. I think that is the culture war. Are Nazis good or bad? This is not a decided issue in America, not at all.
Oh, well, okay. You make a convincing point. I admit when you when you get me
This is in
pointers, but
fact the question of our age. Do we wish to become a Nazi regime or not?
right.
And we seem to be split about 60-40 on that.
You're right. Yeah. Yeah, but this is not a simple thing like do we want to start banning books that mention gay people in our public schools? I mean, this is,
and
these are literal Nazis spreading hate speech.
Yes.
So it's,
yes, and so you can choose to be on the left, and then you would ban all that disinformation and ban sites like Kiwi Farms, or you can choose to be on the right, and then you would push them and ban anybody that is like pro gay rights or pro abortion or anything.
Right.
But if you actually don't wish to be pushed to the left or the right, you're walking this narrowing bridge that's with the ground eroding underneath you. That's very hard to stay in the middle.
If you don't want to be in the left or right, well, first of all, I do want to point out that this is a logical fallacy of being the centrist. Sometimes a side is right or wrong, but also the problem with being a centrist is you are essentially at that point on the side of the conservatives and Nazis, because you are sort of passively supporting the what's going on at the moment.
But this is another really old idea. The old idea of that the business of business is business. And if I'm a company, I want to stay out of all political arguments and just like serve hamburgers. And I say, I don't care what your politics is, I'll serve you a hamburger. And I won't talk about one side or the other or make any judgments. That's what Cloudflare is trying to do. And I recognize it. And it has been the standard recommendation for business for a really long time.
Right. Except that once again, if your position is, and we're talking about literal Nazis, that we'll just allow the Nazis to whatever they want because we don't have a strong position either way about Nazis. You get in the same position as Trump, where he says, "Oh, there are good people on both sides."
No, that is exactly right. And to be fair, if you actually wish to survive as a corporation in America through the coming wave, you don't want to offend the Nazis because they're going to be in power. So, however, you can argue this is a morally bankrupt position, and you really should ally against them. And I sort of like that, but I do understand how that is not a business-like position to take.
Right. And like I said, I can understand it if Cloudflare is like, hey, this is just a purely business thing. We just don't have the infrastructure to deal with, everything we host. We have everything automated. But it's not that at all.
No, it's not that.
Yeah.
It's a fundamental principle that they should not have the role in society of having the right or the authority or the obligation to censor the internet.
Right. And the other thing too is, of course, that they cannot censor the internet. There is nothing keeping Kiwi Farms off the internet other than the fact that no one wants to deal with them. Like once Cloudflare says, we're out of here, there's nothing stopping Kiwi Farms from setting up another server with another provider if the provider will take them. But of course, they're so toxic, no one will touch them with a 10-foot pole.
And what's funny is they could just put up a server themselves and connect it to an internet, to an ISP like Comcast, and they'd be fine. But then they get taken by DDoS attacks. So,
and I'm pretty sure Comcast would not like being the hosting provider of.
Well, they wouldn't be the host; they'd just be delivering, and they're delivering it now. Comcast doesn't block anything, I think.
Right. Right, but well, they would be on the hosting end of the ISP, so they would be the ones,
So if I put up my own server, then I'm my own host,
right?
and then I can use any ISP to deliver the traffic, and I don't think any ISP would refuse to deliver the traffic.
I think if you are hosting, 'cause there are times, for example, when rotten people will do things like use their internet connections to pirate software, and the ISPs
Yeah.
will totally cut off your connection if they see you doing something they
Well,
don't like, you know.
but that's interesting. I was wondering why they didn't protest to Comcast and AT&T. I wonder if Comcast and AT&T would take it down.
They probably would.
Oh, well, then that's interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Now, like I said, the big thing is you just don't want the government deciding what should be up or down. But private entities, you know, that
Well,
seems to be just fine.
it seems logical that the courts should decide that in accordance with the laws.
No, well, to a certain extent, if there are laws being broken, but government censorship historically has been a slippery slope. It does not end well, though private citizens deciding what they will and will not, host on their own private platforms, seems to be a good policy that does abate some of the hate speech. So
Okay. Well,
without any
anyway,
of the drawbacks of the government controlling our lives.
yeah, instead we have a mob of protesters controlling our lives.
I mean, only if you are politically incorrect.
By the way, I have been told that the term politically correct is politically incorrect.
It is actually very politically correct. So the idea behind the term politically correct I tease Sam about not being politically correct and say you need to be more politically correct because it's really a sort of a
Probably
nonsense
quite
term.
true. Yes.
Yes, but it's sort of a nonsense term, and it also refers to the idea that you're not sincere in what you're saying. So the idea is that someone would complain, I'm supposed to say this to the public, but it's not factually correct. Oh, but it's politically correct.
Well, yeah.
And so when you say things like you shouldn't be racist because racism is wrong, and so you should be politically correct, it is honestly like the worst thing, the worst argument you could possibly make, because essentially what you're saying is, well, being racist is not is I don't know if it's factual or not that it's bad, but it's politically correct to say that it's bad. And no, racism actually is really bad. So, yeah, so that's why political correctness is sort of a non-viable term outside of certain contexts. I would say that the best thing that people can say is being polite. You want to be polite and you want to be kind.
That would be nice.
Yes.
But anyway, I think what's actually going on is because our government is breaking and fractured into like irreconcilable sides, they can't really resolve many issues. And now it's just up to sort of mobs of citizens to enforce it. And this is what happens when your government structures no longer represent the people, is the people just turn into sort of militias to enforce things that the government's incapable of enforcing.
I think this is very much the right-wing talking point. However, I disagree that there's any sort of like new mobs or militias that we haven't seen for the entire 20th century. Now there is the internet, so people can get together and can easily communicate with people, but we're not seeing like the rioting on the streets and the mobs, threatening violence, at least on the left, like what you're talking about the, getting Nazis off the internet.
No, but it reflects the failure of our government to have a satisfactory solution. So it's just up to individuals protesting to resolve it. And I think it's not new, but it is much more prevalent now as our government is more and more dysfunctional.
I disagree. And I think that it's really not the government's place to be deciding what should or should not be on the internet in the first place. This is not the government's business. This is, private citizens' responsibility. This is our
well, all right. I'm not sure of that at all.
Anyway, there's an old saying, freedom isn't free, and the price of having a free and open internet is everlasting vigilance on the part of us internet denizens.
All right. Well, let's go on to your satellite that's going to blot out the sun.
Yeah, so we're changing the night sky again. It's awesome. There's a new satellite going up. What's it called? The BlueWalker 3 satellite. I didn't even know about this going up, but New Scientist has an article by Jonathan O'Callaghan, talking about this BlueWalker 3 satellite. And you can see an artist sketch up here where it's this like giant sheet of, I guess, phased antenna arrays and solar panels and stuff. It's going to be huge. It's the size of like many fields.
Well, if you try the other article, they've got a better picture of it.
Oh, they have an even better one. Oh, there it is.
Yeah.
Yeah, so there's an even better picture of the BlueWalker satellite, and it's going to be huge. It's going to be one of the brightest objects in the night sky. And it's not cool like the ISS where we have astronauts doing science and stuff on there. Of course, you can always see at the right time of the night, you can see the ISS as sort of the brightest star in the sky. Well, there's going to be a new brightest star, and all it's doing is delivering cell phone in traffic and stuff. Which
this is the prototype, and if it works, they're going to launch like hundreds of them.
Yeah, and they'll launch a ton. They'll launch a ton more if it's successful. So our night sky might become littered with a lot of like just shooting stars, essentially what they look like in low Earth orbit. You'll see them at right after dusk and right before dawn, mostly, where the sun hits the satellite, but not necessarily the ground yet. And it's going to be very bright, and we're doing it. We're changing the night sky.
So is this going to really, really be a problem for astronomers?
I imagine it'll be a problem. One of the techniques that I've seen people use, especially among amateur astronomers, is to do essentially multiple exposures over long periods of time on a single object. And then what you do is you go into the computer, and no one exposure has the image, but you go into the computer and you start doing like differential analysis and all this stuff on all the images, and eventually you get these really beautiful images, even though you're working on a 6-inch Cassegrain in your backyard, in the middle of a giant city. You can still get these beautiful nebulas and stuff like that. And so there's a lot of techniques that require long exposures or multiple exposures, and if you're having these streaking across the sky unpredictably, then it can get in the way of photographs, which we've seen before. Astronomers complaining that, hey, we're trying to take photographs here, and there are all these streaks in the images. Where are they from? Well, they're from satellites, and of course, satellites already exist. They are causing streaks, but these will cause more streaks, and they will be visible, from the ground as the brightest stars in the sky. So,
all right. And last one I got here. There's many scientists from many different research institutions are pulling together to try to understand long COVID. And the leading theory for long COVID is the reason people remain having COVID symptoms for a long time is that some of the COVID virus is hiding in their body, somewhere in one of the organs. And so they've got a group of researchers from many academic centers banding together, forming this thing called the Long COVID Research Initiative, aiming and funded, by the way, to some extent by Vitalik Buterin, the founder of Ethereum. And they're going to perform a series of medical research experiments to determine if this leading thing is true, that there's COVID lingering in the body of people who are suffering from long COVID. And as soon as I posted a tweet about this, people said, gee, how do I get involved? So I checked, and this group has a Twitter account, the Long COVID Research Initiative. It's research_long, and they're posting stuff. And so a lot of people, I think, are very interested because a lot of people are suffering from long COVID, and they would like to know how to get involved and follow this. So you can follow them on Twitter. It's an important issue of our age. And I didn't see anything where they're calling for like volunteers to test therapies or anything. I don't think it's like that. But anyway, I think a lot of people like to follow this closely because a bunch of people have personal problems with COVID, or they know people that do. I've even read another article that says that there's a lot of people that get long COVID and then commit suicide, and it's actually making suicides go up because they have basically an incurable disablement now. And so there's a lot of interest in finding some kind of way to treat and deal with long COVID. Anyway, I think that's it for this one, and we'll be back on Tuesday.